Everyone remembers the warning. A small orange creature with a yellow moustache stands on a stump in a dying landscape, and he speaks for the trees, and he loses. The factories win. The sky goes grey, the water goes black. The last animal limps away, and the creature who tried to stop it lifts himself into the air and vanishes, leaving behind a single word carved into a stone. Unless, for 2 generations, that has been the story. The Lorax is the environmental fable, the gentlest possible introduction to the idea that the natural world can be destroyed and that destroying it is wrong. It is read in classrooms, it is quoted on tote bags. It is, by reputation, a story about pollution, yet that reputation rests on a memory of the book rather than the book itself. But that is not quite what the book argues. Read the actual text, not the reputation, the text, and something stranger emerges. The Lorax is not primarily a story about pollution at all. It is a story about a confession. The entire book is structured as a guilty man explaining to a child how he came to do an unforgivable thing. And the question the book is actually built around is not how do we save the trees. It is a much older and more uncomfortable question. When something irreplaceable is destroyed for profit, who exactly is to blame? And is blame even the right tool? That is the book Theodore Geisel actually wrote in 1971. The reputation came later, and the reputation is simpler than the thing it describes. To see what the text is doing, you have to start with its structure, because the structure is the argument. The Lorax does not open in the past. It opens in the ruined present, in the street of the lifted Lorax, a dead zone where nothing grows. A young boy pays a price, 15 cents, a nail, and the shell of a great-great-great-grandfather snail, to hear an old recluse explain what happened here. That recluse is the Once-ler, and here is the first thing the popular memory gets wrong. The Lorax is not the protagonist of this book. The Once-ler is. The Lorax appears only inside the Once-ler's memory, summoned by the Once-ler's voice, framed entirely by the Once-ler's account of his own crime. We never see the Lorax independently. We only ever see the version of him that a guilty man remembers. Geisel makes a deliberate choice that almost no adaptation preserves. He refuses to show the Once-ler's face. Throughout the entire book, the Once-ler is a pair of green arms reaching out of a window, a voice from inside a dark tower, a presence with no body. The text describes him doing things, chopping, building, selling, but the illustrations withhold him. He is the most important character in the book, and he is, visually, almost nothing. That is not a stylistic accident. A creature with no visible face is a creature you cannot quite condemn, because you cannot quite see. Other villains in children's books are drawn in full so the reader can hate them, but Geisel built the book's central figure as a deliberate blank, and the blank is the point. The plot the Once-ler narrates is simple and worth stating plainly because the plainness is itself revealing. He arrives in a paradise of truffula trees. He finds the tufts of those trees soft enough to knit, and he invents a product, the thneed, a fine something that all people need that he can make from them. The Lorax appears and objects. The Once-ler ignores him. The business grows. The Once-ler builds a factory, brings in his whole grasping family, invents machinery to chop 4 trees at once, and accelerates. The animals leave as their food and shade vanish. The water and air foul. And then the last truffula tree falls. The business collapses, because there is nothing left to make thneeds from. The family departs. And the Once-ler is left alone in the wreckage he made, with the Lorax's final wordless rebuke, that single carved unless, and decades to think about it. That is a story about industrial collapse. But the way Geisel tells it is a story about a man trying to explain himself. Before we go further into what the Once-ler is actually confessing, we have to establish the scene as it was left, because the version of this book the culture remembers was shaped by what happened to it after publication, and that history changes how we read the text. Here is the part most readers never learn. The Lorax did not originally end with that clean carved word. For 14 years, the book contained a line that Geisel later went to unusual lengths to remove. In the original 1971 text, after the environmental devastation is complete, one of the departing Barbaloots, or rather the narration around the ruined lake, included the line that the humming fish had to leave in search of some water that isn't so smeary. I hear things are just as bad up in Lake Erie. Lake Erie, a specific, real named American lake invoked as a shorthand for water so polluted it had become a national embarrassment. In 1971, that reference landed instantly. Lake Erie was the punchline of American environmental decline. It was the lake people said had died. But Lake Erie did not stay dead. Through the 1970s and 1980s, an enormous clean-up effort, regulation, treatment, sustained public money brought the lake substantially back. And in 1985, 2 research associates at an Ohio research foundation wrote to Geisel to point out that the line was now unfair. The lake had recovered, yet children were reading as a permanent fact that one of their region's defining bodies of water was a synonym for filth when it no longer was. Geisel agreed. He had the line removed from all subsequent printings, and he reportedly said he would remove it as long as the lake stayed clean. Sit with what that act actually means, because it is more revealing than the original line. Geisel did not soften the book under corporate pressure. He did not remove the line because it was too dark. He removed it because the world had changed in exactly the direction the book had hoped for. And a fable that names a specific casualty becomes a lie when that casualty recovers. The Lake Erie edit is the only case in this entire genre where a dark original was sanitized not to protect a brand, but because the warning had partly worked. The clean version of the Lorax exists, in part as a small monument to environmental success. That is the opposite of the usual story, and it tells us the first real thing about what kind of book this is. A pure pollution fable would not need editing when a lake recovers, because a pure pollution fable is about pollution in the abstract. The Lorax needed editing because it was never abstract. It was a specific accusation aimed at a specific historical moment, and when the moment changed, the accusation had to change with it. The book is a document tied to its own time in a way its timeless reputation conceals. The circumstances of its writing confirm this. Geisel did not approach the Lorax the way he approached most of his books. By his own account, he found it the hardest thing he ever tried to write, and he struggled with it precisely because he was afraid of what it would become. He worried repeatedly that the subject would turn the book into propaganda, that an argument about the environment would flatten into a sermon. He called the danger by name. He did not want to lecture. Most authors would have leaned into the message, but the structure he eventually arrived at, after months of difficulty, was his solution to that fear. Rather than have a narrator tell children that pollution is wrong, he would have the guilty party tell the story himself. The sermon is avoided because there is no preacher. There is only a man explaining how he did it. The breakthrough, as Geisel told it, did not come at his desk. He had been stuck for a long time when he was on a trip to Africa, and the sight of elephants against a landscape reportedly unlocked the visual world of the book in an afternoon. Whether or not the anecdote is exact, the point it preserves is real. The book's imagery came quickly, while its argument came slowly and painfully. That ratio matters. Most fables are built argument first, with the images applied like decoration over a lesson already decided. The Lorax was built the other way. Geisel knew what it should look like long before he was willing to commit to what it should say, because what it should say frightened him into honesty. A writer who is afraid of becoming preachy will, if he is good, overcorrect toward fairness. And Geisel was very good. There is a further wrinkle in the publication history that the reputation erases entirely. The Lorax was not universally received as a gentle classic. In timber-producing parts of the United States, the book was attacked, and in at least one school district it faced organized efforts to remove it from reading lists on the grounds that it unfairly maligned the logging industry and the families who depended on it. A counterbook was even produced from within that world, retelling the situation from the loggers' side. The existence of that backlash is not a footnote. It is evidence that the book's first readers understood something the tote bag version forgets. This is a story that assigns blame, and assigning blame in an industry town is not gentle. The people who logged for a living did not read the Lorax as a sweet warning. They read it as an accusation pointed at them. They were not wrong to. The question is only whether the accusation was as simple as they feared, and the text, read closely, suggests it was both more and less than that. Now we can return to the Once-ler and to what he is actually confessing. Because the deeper reading of this book, the thing the reputation flattens, is that the Lorax is unusually, almost uncomfortably, fair to the man who destroys everything. Consider how Geisel writes the Once-ler's motive. He is not a cartoon villain. He does not pollute for the joy of pollution. He arrives genuinely delighted by the truffula trees. The touch of their tufts was much softer than silk, and his first act is one of creation, not destruction. He invents something. The thneed is ridiculous, but the impulse behind it is the ordinary impulse of every maker and entrepreneur who ever lived. He has found a resource, seen a use, and built a thing people want. And people do want it. When the Lorax insists nobody needs a thneed, a customer immediately walks up and buys one. The Lorax is, on the literal facts, wrong. He speaks for the trees with total conviction. Yet the market contradicts him on the spot. The need, whatever its quality, is real. This is the trap Geisel sets, and it is a genuinely sophisticated one. The Once-ler's defense of himself is not stupid. Business is business, he says, and business must grow. He tells the Lorax he has every right to expand, and within the logic of his world, he does. Each individual decision he makes is defensible. Chopping one tree is harmless. Building one factory creates jobs for his whole family. Inventing a faster axe is simply efficiency. At no single point does the Once-ler commit an obvious atrocity. The catastrophe is assembled out of reasonable steps, each one easy to justify, and that is precisely why it happens. Geisel is not describing a monster. He is describing a process, the way that ruin is produced not by malice, but by a sequence of locally sensible choices that no one ever steps back to total up. The Lorax, meanwhile, is the voice that does step back to total it up. But notice what Geisel gives the Lorax and what he withholds. The Lorax warns, repeatedly, eloquently, accurately, and the Lorax has no power whatsoever. He cannot stop the Once-ler. He cannot vote, cannot regulate, cannot buy the land, cannot compete. He can only speak. I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees, and speaking, in this book, does nothing. The most quoted line in the entire story is a statement of complete impotence dressed as authority. The Lorax represents the moral truth, and the moral truth loses every single round because moral truth without leverage is just narration of a disaster in progress. That is the comparison the book is actually built on. Not clean trees versus dirty factories. It is the Once-ler's logic against the Lorax's witness, and the book's quiet horror is that the Once-ler's logic is internally coherent, while the Lorax's witness is internally powerless. Geisel does not stack the deck the way the reputation suggests. He gives the destroyer the better argument and the only real agency, and he gives the defender the better values and no agency at all. The trees do not fall because one man was evil. They fall because the person who could act had reasons to, and the person who saw clearly had no way to. Look closely at how the two characters actually speak, because Geisel encodes the whole asymmetry in their dialogue. The Lorax argues in the language of consequence and care. He points to the brown barber lutes and their need for fruit. He points to the swomy swans and the smog in their throats. He points to the humming fish and the gluppity glup in their pond. Every one of his arguments is a description of harm already happening. He is, in effect, a reporter of damage. But a reporter cannot legislate. He names each casualty as it occurs, and naming changes nothing, because the Once-ler has already priced the casualties in. The Once-ler does not deny a single one of the Lorax's facts. That is the unnerving part. He never says the bears are fine or the fish are healthy. He concedes the harm completely and proceeds anyway, because his framework was never about whether harm occurs. It was about whether the business grows. Two people can agree on every fact and still collide if one of them is measuring suffering and the other is measuring output. And notice that the Once-ler's worst moment is not a moment of cruelty. It is a moment of exhaustion and honesty. When the Lorax makes his final appeal, the Once-ler loses his temper, and what comes out is not a justification, but a kind of confession of helplessness disguised as defiance. He insists he intends to keep biggering his operation, to keep selling, to keep growing, because that is simply what he is, a man whose entire identity is now fused to the thing destroying the valley. He cannot stop, not because he is wicked, but because stopping would mean being no one. The factory is not just his livelihood. By the end, it is his self. Geisel draws the precise mechanism by which a person becomes unable to abandon a course of action that he can plainly see as catastrophic. The action has eaten the actor. There is nothing left of the Once-ler that exists apart from the Thneed. And a man who is identical to his business cannot be argued out of his business by appeals to anything outside it. So the failure in this book is not a failure of information. The Once-ler is fully informed. It is not a failure of feeling either. By the end, he feels everything, the whole weight of it, which is why he is still telling the story decades later to a stranger's child. It is a failure of structure. There is no point in the system where accurate information plus genuine feeling can convert into a stop. The Lorax has the information, the Once-ler eventually has the feeling, and the trees are gone regardless, because information and feeling were never connected to a lever that could halt the machine. The book is a closed loop in which everyone eventually understands. And understanding is simply not the thing that was needed. So what does this contrast reveal? Here is the cultural argument the book is making, and it is sharper than Protect the Environment. The Lorax is a book about the failure of conscience as a mechanism. Written in 1971, at the absolute high watermark of American faith in personal virtue as the answer to systemic problems, recycle, care. Speak for the trees, the book stages, perhaps without fully intending to, the collapse of that very faith. Geisel clearly wants conscience to matter. He gives the Lorax all the best lines, but he is too honest a craftsman to let conscience win, because he can see that in the system he has drawn, conscience has no instrument. The Lorax can make the Once-ler feel terrible. He cannot make him stop. Feeling terrible is in fact exactly what the Once-ler does for the rest of his life, alone in his tower, and the trees are still gone. Guilt is not a remedy. Rather, it is what remains after the remedy was never applied. And this is why Geisel hides the Once-ler's face, and why he frames the whole book as a confession told to a child. The book's actual proposed solution is not regulation, not law, not collective action. The text contains none of those. Its solution is the transmission of guilt across generations. The Once-ler cannot fix what he did. So he passes the last truffler seed and his story to a boy with the instruction, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. The hope of the book is entirely lodged in the conscience of the next person, which is, when you examine it coldly, the same mechanism that already failed. The Once-ler also, presumably, was once a boy who could have cared. The book proposes a fresh young conscience as the cure, yet the disease was a conscience exactly like it. The book's remedy is to do again, with more feeling, the exact thing that did not work the first time. That is the document Geisel produced. Not a simple warning, but a portrait of a culture that genuinely believed bad outcomes came from bad hearts, and a text honest enough, underneath its own optimism, to show that the bad outcome came from an ordinary heart making ordinary choices in a system with no break. The Lake Erie edit fits this exactly. Erie did not recover because someone cared a whole awful lot. It recovered because of law, money, and enforcement, the collective instruments the book never mentions. Reality fixed the lake by the method the fable forgot to include, and Geisel, to his credit, updated the fable to acknowledge the fix while leaving its theory of change untouched. The Reputation remembers a story where the villain pollutes and the hero speaks for the trees. The text contains a stranger and better thing, a destroyer with a coherent defense, a defender with no power, and a solution that is really just the inheritance of remorse. One is a warning about what factories do to forests. The other is a confession about what conscience cannot do to factories. One asks a child to care. The other quietly admits that caring, by itself, is what the Once-ler did, alone, for decades. In the ruins, both live inside the same small book, and the book has spent 50 years being loved for the half of itself that hurts less.